The Teahouse teller has been waiting for you. Some love stories begin with a glance across a crowded hall, a hand extended at exactly the right moment. This one begins with a question left in a corridor, and an answer that arrives through three other people. My name in that season was Shen Mei. I had chosen it because it was the kind of name no one looked at twice. Plain. Soft. Forgettable. My walk was unhurried. My hair was neat. My speech was courteous. Never more interesting than the topic required. I was, by every visible measure, the most unremarkable woman in the capital. I had worked very hard to achieve this. The woman I had been before, the one who drowned in the river on a Thursday in early spring, whose dress was found downstream, whose family mourned with the efficiency of people calculating their next move, that woman had been too capable. Too useful in the wrong directions. She had managed her grandmother's textile routes, kept 3 sets of accounts simultaneously, negotiated contracts with merchants twice her age. And then capability became inconvenient. Her family arranged to sell her to a man old enough to be her grandfather. She looked at the river and thought, well, there is another option. I have always been practical. So Shen Mei was born on a Friday. New name, new walk, new history, memorized to the third question. And by a sequence of events I will explain shortly, which I maintain were not entirely my fault. She became the household manager for Lord Han Wei, magistrate, workaholic, the most inconveniently perceptive man in 3 districts. I want to be clear about something before we begin. I was not rescued. I solved my own problem. I simply required a magistrate to do it, and the only magistrate available happened to be the one whose household I was running. The one who had spent 2 months building a fortress around me for entirely the wrong reasons. He was protecting me from something that did not exist. I was protecting him from the embarrassment of finding that out. We were both, it turned out, terrible at minding our own business. This is that story. 3 weeks into my position, I had achieved something I considered a genuine professional accomplishment. I had made myself completely indispensable and almost entirely invisible. Simultaneously, in the same building, the household ran on my decisions. The kitchen accounts reorganized in the first week, waste reduced by 1/3. The supply schedules re-staggered, so deliveries no longer clashed with the master's court hours. The East Wing, where official case documents were stored, never unattended during the hours when dust and mice posed a genuine threat. Small things, precise things. The kind of management that makes a household feel like it has always run well. Lord Han Wei had not, in 3 weeks, looked directly at me once. I found this enormously satisfying. The position had come through a placement register. My credentials were technically accurate in every detail, except the name and the district of origin. I had 3 offers within a fortnight. The Wei household was not my first choice. It was, however, the one that put the most distance between me and the merchant district. I want to note for the record that I did not know whose household it was when I accepted. I knew it was a magistrate's estate. I did not know it was this magistrate. Lord Han Wei held records from 4 districts. His files, somewhere in the East Archive I was now protecting from dust and mice, contained a document with my original name on it. I discovered this on my 4th day. I did not leave. Leaving would have required another position, another round of interviews, another household to learn. I had already reorganized the kitchen accounts. I was not starting over because of a filing coincidence. The intermediary chain was my solution from the first week. Lord Han Wei moved through the household unpredictably, reviewing documents in the kitchen corridor at the 7th hour, standing in the East Garden at midnight, thinking about nothing that had to do with the garden. Managing him directly would have put me in his path. So I managed him through Ru. Ru was the head maid. Professional, observant, and possessed of the excellent quality of not asking questions she could not officially receive answers to. She was the first link in the chain. The kitchen maid Liane was the second. The household clerk, Master Shu, was the third. Through this chain I ran every corner of the household. Through this chain every question Lord Han Wei asked received a prompt, accurate, and entirely disembodied answer. It worked perfectly. It worked perfectly for exactly 18 days. On the 19th day, his questions changed. In the first 2 weeks, they had been practical. Supply queries, staffing questions, an inquiry about the archive organization. But on the 19th day, a question arrived through Ru with a quality I can only describe as deliberate. He had asked, through entirely normal channels and an entirely normal tone, whether the household manager had a preference for the morning or afternoon delivery window for the grain merchant's weekly order. It was not a question that needed asking. I had already established the schedule, he had approved it, the merchant had it. He was asking which window I preferred. I stood in the linen storage room where I had been conducting inventory, looked at the question written in Ru's neat characters, and thought, he is mapping the chain. I wrote back, the morning window is more efficient for kitchen preparation. Either is acceptable. Ru delivered it with the expression of a woman who had decided, wisely, to continue not knowing what was happening. I finished the inventory. He was curious, a magistrate's professional habit, the instinct of a man who investigated things for a living and could not turn it off at home. I was not worried. I was, privately, a little impressed. I was also aware that being impressive was precisely what I could not afford. Across the city, in the merchant district, my uncle was meeting with Merchant Gao for the 3rd time that month. The contract for my grandmother's business sat on a table between them. It would be signed within the month if I did nothing. I was doing something. I was simply doing it carefully. At a distance. Through 3 people. While making myself as forgettable as a woman of my particular capabilities could manage. My grandmother would have found this either very funny or deeply irritating. Possibly both. He asked interesting questions. That was the problem. Not all of them. Most were practical. But distributed among the practical ones, with a frequency I tracked without meaning to, were questions that were precise, in a way that suggested he had thought about them before asking. About how decisions were made. About the history of certain household arrangements. Questions that were, technically, about the household, but that contained, like a thread pulled loose in a well-made garment, the faint outline of a question about bears. I answered them all, precisely, professionally, through the correct channels, always one layer more complete than required, because completeness discouraged follow-up. This strategy had one flaw. Interesting answers from an interesting person are still interesting. On a Tuesday, he sent a question about the household's seasonal staff changes over 3 years. I recognized it immediately as an investigator's question, dressed as an administrative one. I had seen my grandmother use the same technique on evasive merchants. I spent 20 minutes on the answer, organized it in a format that was clean, complete, and demonstrated, I could not help it, a familiarity with record management at scale. When it arrived on his desk, he was apparently quiet for a long moment. Ru reported this, with the carefully neutral expression of a woman who had decided that whatever was moving through her hands was above her station to interpret. Then came the morning of the leaking roof. The east wing had developed a leak above the second corridor, minor, but positioned directly above the archive documents. I had identified it, drafted repair instructions, dispatched them through Master Shu. timed my movement through the household to avoid the master's court preparation hour. I had not accounted for the court session being cancelled. I came around the corner of the second corridor, documents in hand, entirely purposeful, and Lord Han Wei was standing at the end of it. He was taller than I had registered from a distance. I noted this and set it aside. He looked at me, I looked at him. I had approximately 2 seconds. "My lord," the correct bow, not a fraction deeper or shallower. I was coming to leave instructions about the East Corridor leak. The second shelf from the top in the north section is at risk if we have rain before the repair. I would recommend moving the pre-reform district records as a precaution. The carpenter can begin this afternoon if you approve the work order. He had opened his mouth. He had not yet closed it. I also wanted to flag the archive filing system. Master Shu has been using date-first organization for newer documents, but the older records are indexed by district, and the inconsistency is creating retrieval delays. I can standardize it over the next 2 weeks without disrupting daily access. He closed his mouth. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had come to ask a question and found the answer already waiting. Organized. Cross-referenced. "The work order is approved," he said. "Standardize the filing." "Thank you, my lord." I bowed, turned, walked back the way I had come at exactly the pace of a household manager with 3 other things to attend to. I turned the corner, entered the linen storage room, closed the door. I had almost, at the moment he looked at me, almost looked back in the way that a person looks at someone they find interesting, rather than the way a household manager looks at her employer. I had corrected it in time. I was almost certain I had corrected it in time. In his study at the other end of the household, Lord Han Wei stood in the corridor for a moment after I had gone. He returned to his desk. He had documents to review. He reviewed them. He thought, briefly, about the archive filing system. He thought about it for longer than the filing system warranted. He picked up his brush. He wrote 3 characters. Correct characters for the land survey case. He did not think about the filing system for the rest of the afternoon. He thought about it again in the evening, briefly, while standing in the East Garden. He went back inside. He had work to do. The grain merchant arrived on a Wednesday with a revised contract that contained a mathematical error so fundamental I noticed it before he had finished unrolling the document. I was not supposed to be in the receiving room. I heard the figures being read aloud and stopped walking. The per-unit price was correct. The quantity was correct. The seasonal adjustment was correct. The total was wrong, by a margin suggesting the merchant had either made an error or was hoping no one would check. I stepped in. "The total should be 43 strings and 8, I said, not 46. The seasonal adjustment is applied before the volume discount, not after." Xu Ping stared at me. Ru stared at me. The contract lay between them. The problem was not the figures. The problem was that I had just performed a multivariable supply calculation in under 5 seconds, out loud, without a counting frame or a reference document, in front of a witness. I became aware of this approximately 1 second after I had done it. Lord Han Wei was standing in the doorway. He was looking at me with the expression of a man who has just received information he had not expected and is very quietly filing it in the correct location. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, at exactly the tone of a household manager who has spotted a practical error. "Ru, once the figures are confirmed, you can proceed with the standard approval process." I left. I walked to the linen storage room, closed the door, stood in the particular silence that follows a mistake you cannot unmake. It was not catastrophic. I told myself this clearly. What I had demonstrated was familiarity with merchant accounting, common for household managers who came from trade families. Not implausible. I waited. His conclusion arrived not directly, but through a change in the household's atmosphere. Thursday, nothing. Friday, the household accounts were restructured. My salary was now recorded under a category that did not correspond to my name. Saturday, a merchant from my district arrived at the outer gate and was turned away. Sunday, I added these items to my list. Monday, I added one more, a notation in the visitor log, in Han Wei's hand, flagging inquiries from 4 specific merchant families for personal review before any household staff were contacted. The 4 families included mine. He had reached a conclusion. Wrong in every particular except its direction. He knew I was from a merchant family, knew I was hiding something, decided it was reduced circumstances and someone looking for me, and decided it was none of his business and he was going to make sure nothing reached me. He was wrong about everything, except that last part. I looked at the plain white wall of the linen storage room, the one surface in the household that did not present me with a new problem, and sat with that knowledge settling over me like something I did not have a word for. A man I had been carefully avoiding for 3 weeks had decided, without being asked, that she was worth protecting. I had been alone with my problems for a long time. I had not known that until just now. I picked up my inventory notes. I went back to work. Spring moved into early summer. The roof was repaired. The archive was reorganized. The grain contract was renegotiated at the correct figures, with Xu Ping apparently deciding honesty was the better policy when dealing with a household where the manager could do his arithmetic faster than he could. He had begun leaving his questions in different locations. Previously, they had arrived through Ru, from the study, in the morning. Now, a question on the supply ledger in the east corridor, tucked under the cover. On the desk in the staff management room, which he had no official reason to visit. Once on the shelf in the south reading room, beside the pre-reform records I had moved for the roof repair. He was not mapping the chain anymore. He was leaving things in places where I would find them. Whether he knew he was doing this, I cannot say. I answered every question. Through the chain. Through Ru, as always. On a Wednesday evening I was crossing the inner courtyard when I heard Lian laughing at something the carpenter's apprentice had said. A good joke. I didn't hear the content, only the result, which was, Lian bent nearly double with her hand over her mouth. I smiled. I kept walking. From the study window above, Lord Han Wei looked up from his documents. He looked at the window, back at his documents, at the window again. He picked up his brush and wrote 3 characters that were not the ones he intended, and had to begin the page again. I found the crumpled paper 2 weeks later in the study waste bin, during a document review. The characters he had written, approximately, there she is. I found the document in the household ledger for the 3rd month, filed behind the supply records, in a section I had created. It was in his hand, 4 lines. Line 1. Household manager salary to be recorded under estate maintenance. Line 2. Inquiries from the following districts to be directed to master's office before any staff contact. Line 3. Merchants presenting introductions from certain families to be received by master personally. Line 4. The Eastgate visitor log to be reviewed each morning before household opening. Below the lines, a list of names, my family's trading connections, my uncle's household, my grandmother's former business partners. He had listed everyone who might come looking for a dead girl. He had positioned himself between them and the household, without telling anyone, without being asked. I sat with the ledger for a long time. He was wrong about the threat. The families on his list believed I was dead. They had moved on. He was protecting me from nothing. He was completely, carefully, sincerely protecting me from nothing. And there was something in my chest I did not have a precise word for. Not gratitude. Gratitude is for received favors, and this was something he had not known he was giving me. Something quieter, something that felt like, like a door opening into a room I hadn't known was there. He had done a careful, sincere thing. I would carry it. I would let it stand. He was protecting me from the wrong threat. I would protect him from discovering that. We were both, now, running operations. Neither of us knew about the others. I found this, once the door-opening feeling had settled, privately, quietly, helplessly funny. My grandmother would have found it hilarious. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in the 6th month. It came through official channels through the district correspondence office, addressed to Lord Han Wei's court. Master Shu mentioned it in passing. A petition from a merchant household in the Shen trading district regarding a property transfer. Could he have direction on which queue it should enter? I heard Xianxia trading district and felt the specific stillness of a woman who has just heard a sound she had been listening for without knowing she was listening. The petitioner's name was my uncle's. He had gone to the magistrate's court, and through the district assignment system, through terrible luck or terrible efficiency, he had been routed to asterisk this one. I went to the linen storage room, closed the door, sat down on the floor, which was not something I had done before, and which told me the situation had reached a level one had not previously encountered. The petition would be reviewed. The review would generate inquiries. The inquiries would reach the district records. The district records contained my grandmother's will. The will named me, and the court would need to determine the current status of the named beneficiary. The current status of the named beneficiary was dead. I ran the options. Option 1, remain dead. Let the transfer proceed. Lose the business. Lose my grandmother's 40 years of work to a man who wanted it for arithmetic. This option was available. I had kept it available. I had not used it. Option 2, claim the business through a third party. Legally uncertain, potentially traceable. Option 3, approach the court directly, as myself. Invalidate the death record, reclaim the will, require a magistrate's recognition. The third option was the only one that worked. It had always been the only one. I had simply been hoping to reach it on my own terms and timeline. That was not how this was going. There was exactly one magistrate in my immediate vicinity. I thought about the fortress. About 4 quiet lines in a ledger, written by a man who did not know why he was writing them, except that it seemed like the right thing to do. I thought about what it would cost to tell him the truth. I had never asked anyone for anything in my life. My grandmother gave me things because she assessed me as capable, not because I asked. My family took things because they could. I had learned very early that asking was a vulnerability, and vulnerabilities get used. But the business was the point. My grandmother had built it. She had left it to me because I was the most capable. I was not going to let it go to a man who wanted it for arithmetic. I stood up, straightened my jacket, looked at the plain white wall one last time. I went to find Rue. Please tell the master, I said, that the household manager would like to request a private meeting. The matter is personal and urgent. Rue looked at me with the expression of a woman who had been carrying messages between 2 people for 4 months, and had known for at least 3 of them that it was going to end like this. Yes, she said. She went to deliver the message. Across the household, in the study, Han Wei put down his brush. Just personal and urgent. He repeated it quietly. A pause. He pulled a document from the pile, the petition from the Shen trading district. He had flagged it that morning for personal review. He read the petitioner's name, he read the subject, he read the name in the attached will. He was quiet for a long time. Then he got up, walked to the East office and waited. The East office had better light in the afternoon. I had mentioned this 3 weeks earlier in a message through Rue. About autumn contract reviews. Standing in the doorway now, I understood why I had mentioned it. He was beside the desk, not behind it. The way he worked when he was thinking rather than writing. The petition was on the desk. I could see my uncle's name on the cover. He looked up. I came in. I closed the door. "My lord," I said, "I have not been entirely honest about my circumstances." "I know," he said. I looked at him. "You read the petition." "This morning," he looked at it. "A property transfer, a will, a beneficiary named Shen." He stopped. He looked at me. "Yes," I said. I sat down. "Not protocol. You did not sit in the master's presence without invitation." He did not object. I told him all of it. The grandmother's death, the will, the family's arithmetic, the concubinage arrangement, the dress, the river, the current I had measured, the register, the credentials, the new name chosen for its forgettability, the accident of position. I had not known it was his household. I told him this directly. It was the district assignment, available positions, the distance from the merchant quarter, and I had already reorganized the kitchen accounts by the time I found the archive record. I was not starting over for a filing coincidence. He almost smiled. It happened quickly, then was gone. But I saw it. I told him about Gao, about the contract, about my uncle's petition arriving that morning, about the will, legal, witnessed, filed correctly in the district records, currently being applied to a transfer for a woman who was officially dead. I told him what I needed, not in the language of asking, in the language of stating a problem and identifying the mechanism required to solve it. I needed the death record invalidated, the petition halted, the will enforced under my correct identity. I needed a magistrate. I stopped. The East office was quiet. Outside, ordinary sounds. Leanne's voice, the carpenter's apprentice, Rue's footsteps. Everything unchanged. Which seemed wrong, given that I had just said everything I had been not saying for 4 months. He looked at the petition. He said, "Your grandmother's will. Was it filed with the Shen District Records Office or the Capital Central Registry?" I stared at him. "The District Records Office," I said, "filed in the 2nd month of last year, before she died. She was very thorough." "Witnessed by?" "2 merchants and a district clerk, all named in the document." He nodded. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper. "The petition will need to be reclassified as contested. That halts the transfer automatically. The death record invalidation goes through the civil registry with a magistrate's seal. Given that the original record was filed in the Shen district and this office has jurisdiction over capital residents, I can process both." He wrote something. "The witnesses to the will, are any of them still reachable?" He was moving through this with the same quality he applied to everything. Precise, forward, solving the actual problem, not the dramatic version of it, but the real one, with its specific legal requirements and procedural steps. My throat felt strange. I watched his hand move across the paper. He looked up. Was there something else? I laughed. I had not planned to. It simply came, fully, without performance, without the careful management I had been applying to every response for 4 months. The first genuinely unguarded thing I had done in this building. He looked at me. His expression was still composed, still precise. But there was something else there. Small, warm, not entirely hidden, and I recognized it. I had been watching him for 4 months. He looked back at the paper. Almost a smile. "I will have the instruments drafted by end of week," he said. "You will need to present yourself at the civil registry in person. I will accompany you to confirm the magistrate's seal." "Yes, my lord." "The staff need not be informed of the details." "I understand." A pause. Rue has been remarkably professional throughout this entire period. She has. I intend to note it formally in her record. I looked at the petition on the desk, the paper filling with clean, careful characters. The afternoon light coming through the window I had mentioned, weeks ago, through an intermediary. "Lord Han Wei," I said. He looked up. "The fortress," I said, "in the household accounts. The 4th month instructions. I found them 3 months ago." I paused. I did not say anything because I did not know how to say it correctly. Another pause. "I am saying it now because you deserve to know that I knew, and that it—" I stopped. The language of asking had never been available to me, but there was another language, quieter, more precise, that I had been learning for 4 months without knowing it. "It mattered," I said. It was misdirected, and it mattered, very much. He looked at me for a long moment. "The threat I was protecting you from," he said carefully. "It was not the threat." "No." A pause. "But the real threat," he said, "was already here. It arrived this morning, yes." He was quiet. Then, "I see." He looked at the paper. "Then the fortress was in the wrong position." "Yes. It should be moved." "That would be my recommendation." He almost smiled again, longer this time. Then he looked back at the paper. "Come to the study after the household is settled," he said. "I will begin the legal instruments tonight." He moved one document to the right side of the desk. He said nothing else. He did not need to. I sat down, on the left side. We got back to work. 3 months later, the grandmother's business was open. Not in the Shen district. Too many people there had attended my funeral. The new office was in the capital's central trading quarter, registered under a name that was mine by law, managed by staff I had hired, running routes I had rebuilt from the original documents. My grandmother's head clerk, who had given his deposition with the enthusiasm of a man who had been waiting to give it for 2 years, was the senior manager. Gao's contract had been dissolved. Legally, cleanly, without drama. He had objected through the appropriate channels. The appropriate channels were managed by a magistrate who had an extremely precise understanding of which aspects of Gao's business interests would benefit most from official scrutiny. Gao withdrew the objection. My uncle sent a letter. I did not open it. The Wei household still ran beautifully. Rue was now the household manager, elevated in title and salary, which she accepted with the expression of a woman who had known this was coming. She ran the intermediary chain with brisk efficiency. I found this deeply satisfying to observe. I was still in the household. This was the consequence of a visit from Lady Han Wei, the magistrate's mother, in the 7th month. A sharp woman in her late 50s, strong opinions about household management, stronger opinions about her son's habits, and the directness of a woman who had spent 30 years watching people talk around obvious things. She had toured the household, reviewed the accounts, eaten in the kitchen, examined the archive filing system. Then she found me in the staff management room and said without preamble, "You run this household better than it has been run in 20 years. My son is not going to do anything practical about this on his own timeline, so I am going to. I would like to discuss an arrangement." I looked at her. "Lady Han, I should tell you something about my circumstances." "You staged your own death," she said. "Yes, we told me, sit down." She had brought tea. She poured it herself. This told me something about her that I liked immediately. "My son," she said, "has spent 11 years solving everyone else's problems and has not solved the most obvious one. You are capable, sensible, and apparently undauntable, which is what he needs. He would also, if you asked him, tell you that you are the most interesting problem he has encountered in 11 years of investigation, and that he has no intention of letting it remain unsolved. A pause. He would not use those exact words, but that is what he would mean. He would investigate his way to a marriage proposal, I said. He would, she agreed, sometime around the middle of next year, at his current pace. She picked up her tea. I am accelerating the timeline. She sent the formal proposal within the week. Han Wei found out from his mother. He came to find me in the study, the left side of the desk, where I was now regularly working with the grandmother's business ledgers alongside his case files. He stood in the doorway with the expression of a man who had just had something he was planning to do eventually done for him on a timeline he had not set. My mother, he said. I received the proposal, I said, last Tuesday. He sat behind the desk, looked at his documents, looked at me. I had a plan, he said. I believe you. It was a good plan, several stages. How many? A pause. 4. I looked at the ledger. Your mother has better pacing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, she was right, in the relevant respects. Yes. He looked at the desk. He was a man who had spent his entire career in precise language, and he was discovering that the most important sentence he had ever needed to say was the one he had least prepared for. I waited. The East Office light, he said finally. You mentioned it, in the message about the autumn contracts, 3 weeks before any of this. You mentioned the afternoon light. He looked at me. I read that message and I sat in the study for 20 minutes. A pause. I want you to know that, before the answer. I looked at him for a long moment. This precise, workaholic, thoroughly impractical man, who had built a fortress around the wrong threat with complete sincerity, who had asked about the grandmother's business first, who had moved a document to make room for me at his desk. I found the proposal acceptable, I said. He almost smiled. He moved a document to make room on his side of the desk. We got back to work, together. Outside, in the household that Rue now ran, with complete and unflappable efficiency, the intermediary chain was officially retired. Rue had informed Lian and Master Shu, with the expression of a woman closing a chapter she had found professionally interesting and was content to see end. Lian had asked, but how will we know what's happening? Rue considered this. We will probably, she said, simply be told. She was not wrong. The Teahouse has heard many love stories. This one it holds with particular warmth. Not because it was the grandest, but because it was built by two people who were both, in their separate ways, alone with something they had decided to carry by themselves, and did not know they had stopped being alone until it was already done. She had staged her own death, reinvented herself from the ground up, managed a magistrate's household through 3 intermediaries and a linen storage room, and done all of it with considerable intelligence and quiet amusement at her own situation. He had built a fortress around the wrong threat, left questions in places she would find them, lost his place in a land survey case because someone laughed in the courtyard, asked about the grandmother's business first because that was the actual problem, and he solved problems, moved a document to make room at his desk and called it nothing, because it was simply the practical thing to do. Neither of them called it what it was for a very long time. They did not need to. The Teahouse has learned over many years and many stories that some things do not need to be named to be real. The fortress was real. The afternoon light was real. The full laugh in the East Office, the first unguarded thing she had done in that building, was real. Her grandmother had left her a business and a principle. The person with the most complete information wins. What her grandmother had not told her, what no one tells you until you find it out yourself, is that the most complete information is sometimes simply this. Someone moved a document to make room for you, and meant everything by it, and said nothing at all. If this whisper found you, subscribe to Whispers from the Teahouse. Every story here was real. Every love was worth telling. Some loves do not end. They only wait to be found by someone who was looking, all along, for exactly the right problem. This has been a Whisper from the Teahouse.